How's it going, everyone? Cup of Science Joe here. I would like to start talking a little bit about the constellations. But before getting into this first video, let's start out by touching on what a constellation is. It can be described as a pattern of stars that looks like a particular shape, sometimes more so than others. And if you were to connect the dots and use a bit of imagination, they may even look like an object, animal, or a person. The constellation I'd like to talk about today is Orion the Hunter. And if you look behind me, you can see I'm starting to build out a more proper background. We actually have the Horsehead Nebula. Now, I found this fitting because I learned today that the Horsehead Nebula is in the constellation of Orion. So, unknowingly, I paired these things up perfectly. And the Horsehead Nebula is interesting because it is a dark nebula. What makes this different from a regular nebula is that instead of being the thing that's emitting the light we're seeing, it's actually kind of like a pillar of dust and gas that is obstructing light coming from behind it, which is what leads it to be known as a dark nebula. With that fun piece of trivia out of the way, let's move over to Stellarium because it's going to help us visualize this constellation a little bit better. So here we are, and thanks to Stellarium, we have a nice visualization of Orion the Hunter right here. In the northern hemisphere, Orion is most visible from January to March. The Greeks thought this arrangement of stars looked like a hunter with a sword attached to his belt. It is for this reason that the constellation is known as Orion the Hunter. There are several historical stories behind Orion, but for the Greeks, they have him being born in Boeotia, and early traditions name him as the son of Poseidon. There's a more fantastical version that I read that involves gods urinating on the hide of a bull, and Orion coming from that. But we'll probably leave details of that maybe for another time. Orion was a hunting companion of the huntress goddess Artemis. Some versions of the story say she is also the one who kills Orion, but I like to think maybe he valiantly died in battle. After this, her father Zeus immortalized the giant huntsman by placing him in the sky as a constellation, thus allowing us to see him until the end of time. Moving away from mythology and into what we can observe, let's talk about some of the stars in this constellation. The easiest way to spot Orion in the night sky is through Orion's belt, which we can see right here. From our point here on Earth, and especially to the naked eye, the Orion's belt may look like three individual stars, but zooming in with different instruments reveals a different story. The star on the far right, known as Mintaka, is actually 5 stars in a complex star system. Another star in the belt, Alnitak, is a triple star system. And so that he doesn't feel left out, the third star in the belt we have is called Alnilam, although I may have butchered any of these 3 names. The giant star Betelgeuse is also in Orion. Funnily enough, we can see it here right in his armpit. By stellar standards, the star is very young, at around 10 million years old. For a point of comparison, our very own sun is nearly 5 billion years old. Betelgeuse is a lot more massive, though. It is so big that if it were to replace our sun in the solar system, it would extend past and swallow up the asteroid belt, landing somewhere around Jupiter. So the entire inner solar system, including us, would simply not exist. That certainly would not be good for us. Due to this giant mass, it leads a fast and furious life. Betelgeuse is destined to end its life in a glorious fashion, exploding as a supernova. In fact, its size and orange-red color tells us that it is already nearing the end of its life. And by end of its life, of course, I mean on a cosmic timescale. Currently, it is expected that Betelgeuse will go supernova sometime in the next 100,000 years. So while it is possible it may occur in our lifetime, it is highly unlikely. And if it were to go supernova in our lifetime, it's far enough away that it wouldn't bring harm to us here on Earth. Speaking of distance, in terms of cosmic scales, it's still rather close at only about 700 light years away, which also leads to why it's so bright in the sky. And because of this brightness and close proximity, we have been able to study some unique things with it that we just haven't been able to look at with other stars before. One such example came in 2019 when it dimmed by around 60% in an event known as the Great Dimming. It was speculated at the time that this may have been the start of us seeing it go supernova. However, in time, its brightness would return more to what we're used to seeing it at. A year later, we would discover that what really happened was the star had blown off enough of its mass that the material was obstructing its view between us and the star, which caused it to dim as much as it did. And this was our first instance of observing a star, like directly being able to observe a star, doing something of this nature. And so I would presume anyway that Betelgeuse isn't the only star that actually does this, and other red giants or stars close to going supernova probably are doing something similar. Also, Betelgeuse will probably end its life as either a neutron star or a black hole, depending on how much of its mass is left behind at the time it actually does go supernova. We also have the ever so popular Orion Nebula, which can be found down here in his sword. This star-forming region sits about 1,300 light years away from Earth, and it is one of the brightest nebula in the night sky. From a dark enough spot, and I've even been told maybe from a spot with a little bit of light pollution, it can be viewed from Earth with the naked eye. However, with binoculars or a telescope, even more detail can be revealed. This is one of my favorite nebula, and a big part of that I think is because it's the first one that I personally was able to find when I looked through it with my telescope. When I go stargazing, I find it exciting to know that there are much more to constellations than meets the eye. And if you happen to find yourself stargazing, perhaps let them guide you to some of the coolest objects in our cosmos. And, of course, have a look at the Orion Constellation and all of its cosmic wonder. I hope you've learned something, and I implore you to step outside tonight and look towards the stars.